So hi there, everybody. We'll get started. My colleague Otla will be handling the admissions, so you might hear a few beeps along the way as we clear the last few admissions. I'm John Mancini with Infotection, and next slide, please, Vivek. So welcome to everybody. As I mentioned, this is being recorded so that you can view it asynchronously later on, and also we urge you to share it with your colleagues. I'm really privileged to be here today with this set of characters, and it's going to be an interesting exercise as the moderator in being in herding cats today, because not only are these three guys very talkative, but they are extremely knowledgeable about the topic that we're going to talk about today. And so the way we'll parse the presentation is that Nishan is going to first talk about Microsoft compliance tools, and specifically in the context of automatically discovering, classifying, and protecting sensitive information. Then we're going to switch to Vivek Bhatt, who's the CTO at Infotection, and he's going to talk a little bit about this question of establishing a business case. And then thirdly, Brian is going to talk a little bit about how you set up strategy and blueprint and things like that. And then hopefully a bit of time for Q&A at the end. And so we're going to try to move briskly through the agenda, and really appreciate you all being here today. So next slide. I'm going to be quick in my opening comments, mainly because we have such terrific, knowledgeable speakers here. You've probably seen this slide. This is a Microsoft slide, those little four rings there. And I particularly like it because this question of knowing your data, protecting your data, preventing data loss, and governing your data are all directly germane to the problem that organizations are having right now with unstructured information and unstructured content. And the two data points that I usually use to talk a bit about this are familiar probably to people that have heard me speak before. The first one is that over the years, I've surveyed probably 1,000 different people from all sorts of different roles within organizations. And I've asked them the question of, if the volume of information that you're handling now is X, what do you expect it to be in 2 or 3 years? And the answer almost universally comes back something between 3.5 and 4x. And so you have that dramatic change in the whole question of the volume of information that people are managing. And then I usually ask them a second question, which is that when you think about that volume and you think about, what's the rough percentage that is either unstructured or semi-structured in nature, the kind of stuff that those of us that have been in this space for a long time call content. And that answer usually comes back at between 55 and 60% is unstructured or semi-structured in nature. So you've got that vector of radically increasing volume, radically increasing complexity, and that points to the need for different approaches to manage it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, specifically in the context of privacy and compliance. Just a quick note about Infotection, just so you know who they are. It's a leading consulting and strategy firm in the whole area of M365 governance. When I think about the question of, what's unique about Infotection, probably my experience in arriving at Infotection is illustrative of that. I worked at AIM, and many of you know, for 25 years, left AIM 3-4 years ago, and was thinking about where I wanted to land. And in part, where I wanted to land was somewhere that reflected knowledge about what was going on in the cloud and what was going on with M365. And so it became clear to me in looking around that Infotection was the leading organization that really understood those issues and some of the potential that was out there in terms of fully leveraging the Microsoft toolset. They also were doing this at scale, which I thought was really interesting, not only scale in terms of the size of the organization, but the volume of information that was being managed. They were also doing it globally, which was also particularly interesting to me. And lastly, they really had a commitment. This probably goes back to my AIM roots of learning and sharing, hence something like this webinar here today. There's also a really, really aggressive speaking schedule that the Infotection folks have had. And so, it's that question of, these aren't just one-off exercises. These are exercises in which hopefully the cumulative knowledge of the community helps in terms of increasing the speed to market and the agility that people have in deploying these products, because it's challenging, and having the right strategy is really what this whole thing is all about. So at the end, you'll see my email, john.m@infotection.com. If there's any way that Infotection can help, just send me a quick email and I'll hook you up with the right people. And so without further ado, let me turn it over to my good friend, Nishan. I know Nishan back from the days of being on the AIM board. And Nishan, take it away.
Great. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. And thanks so much, John. Super excited to be here with one of our key partners, Infotection, in the Microsoft partner ecosystem. For those who don't know me, my name is Nishan DeSilva. I'm in the Microsoft newly formed division called Security, Compliance, Management, and Identity. This is where we really brought close to 10,000 engineers together from the M365 side and the Azure side to form this new division to really focus our energies around security, compliance, identity, and management. So excited to be part of this organization. And today I'm going to spend a little bit of time on three separate categories. One is around information protection. And then I'll talk a little bit about our new solution that we just GA'd about a couple of weeks ago called Priva. That's our privacy solutions. And then I'll talk a little bit about my favorite topic that some of you know is around information governance and records management, some of the investments we're making there. Want to take a step back and just talk about, John set up that slide. I'll tell you, John, it took a couple of, when you look at one slide, you think it was put together in 2 seconds, but that was a lot of learnings from customers, learnings from engineering, spending time with customers. Like, I've worked with Vivek for a long time too in the journey path of many organizations. And so these learnings help us put together about what our customers looking at. And it really comes to fundamentally, it's about data, right? If you look at it. And so the days when we used to talk about compliance was a compliance problem and it was not a security problem, it's not the case anymore. If you look at what's happening with dark data, what's happening with data breaches, what's happening with regulatory obligations, all these things really relate to some of the things that are happening in the compliance space. Like if you're not compliant, if you don't have the right policies, if you don't have the right process, everything that we've been talking for the last couple of years, the reality is we thought that security and compliance were not connected. It is so deeply connected. And that's what we saw at organizations, how much the compliance officers and the compliance folks work with the security folks. And that's what you'll see as Microsoft looks at this space, not only around security compliance, but then the identity of who you are, what you do becomes all important to our customers. So this wanted to just frame what I'll talk about today, but these are some of the things when we talk about information protection and governance, these are some of the things we hear from our customers. So how do we address this? So that's where I'll talk a little bit about the suite of solutions. If you can go to the next slide, kind of tells you where we are investing, right? So this is the journey path of our investments are really around information protection and governance, where we look at that digital estate of an organization and figure out how do you protect that information. And I'll talk a little bit about how we can manually protect information and also using our machine learning algorithms. Then how to govern that information, not only the days of when Microsoft said, hey, we can only protect your data, that's not what's expected by our customers. And that's why partners like you are critical, how we are also thriving the ecosystem with APIs and connecting with other solutions, including there are so many things. I'll even talk about the partnership they're doing with AWS. How do we connect with Google? So it's no longer thinking it's in this silo of how we are, it's a multi-cloud strategy that when we look at information governance and protection. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in a few minutes. One of our newer solutions that we also entered into the market was this insider risk. It's really, when you talk about disgruntled employees, contractors, if you look at the data breaches that are going on, it's about corp access and then creating policies and those signals and importance of that into the compliance office, the privacy office, the SOC. And so this is one of the fastest growing solutions that we have in our suite of compliance is the insider risk. And I know that John said it right. I can talk for hours about each of these topics. And so I'll try to at least give you the quick takeaway for each one, right? The third one is e-discovery, right? I mean, this one, we've been at this for a while. It was one of the foundational pieces that we built, but the amount of investments we made around machine learning about how you can actually discover in Microsoft Teams. So there's some significant investments we've done, that case-centric approach we have brought into it. So if you get a chance, please do take a look at some of the investments we made in the e-discovery space and also connecting to other data sources, etc. One thing that my last pillar here in this one is called Compliance Manager, which is called kind of our compliance core, but really what it helps an organization do. Many times when I talk to customers, they're like, hey, I don't even know what I have. What kind of policies I have? No, even gets better. I have all your products. I have nowhere how to get started. So this is where we are really investing in this compliance posture of understanding what you have, what regulations that you're supposed to be obligated to, what can do. So there's a lot of workflows and wizards we have built in there to help you kind of understand how do you actually start looking at your compliance posture. And the new one that I'll spend a little bit of time today, which is the privacy, and we kind of branded this, and it's a new one. And I think even Vivek was excited to hear about this. Wait a minute, when did this come out? I said, yeah, we actually announced this at Ignite, but you'll see a lot more blast of this kind of this brand that will come called Microsoft Priva. We are going to be building a bunch of privacy capabilities, just like how we started with, there was a question 2 years ago, said, hey, what is MIP? And when you look, it's a collection of solutions that are helping this information protection strategy. Same with the Priva. I'll talk a little bit more about the Priva capabilities. How do you manage a risk posture of looking at your privacy data in your digital estate? And then how do you also automate that data subject rights request? So I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So this is just to give you that framing of what are the different suite capabilities, and you can imagine this is just the beginning of many, many things to come. It is, when you look at security and compliance, security business at Microsoft is growing it's what we are now considered one of the biggest security companies in the world. But guess what? In the compliance space, we are 10xing every year. So we just released our financials. If you go take a look at some of the numbers in there, our compliance business is definitely, I know a couple of years ago, I get this question a lot when I was at AIM or when I'm doing a presentation. Hey, are you guys serious about compliance? Are you guys really going to invest in this area? You can say, you betcha. My team itself, what I do inside engineering, has grown in the last 3 years by 20 times. So it's definitely an area the organization is investing and what we are seeing from customers. So let me now break this down into the information protection area. I just want to spend a little bit of time on that one. If you go to the next slide and see if, John, if you have any questions for me, please, me, interject and ask away. And I've also told John that these are not prepared questions. He has surprised me in the past. So either I will tell you I don't know and I'll come back to you after that. But definitely, please ask any questions so that we can make this interactive.
And these are the same bubbles that I had earlier, except in a vertical array.
That's right. I just wanted to kind of I thought I'll do a little bit of a double click on this, right? And kind of walk you through how customers who are on this call today or partners can think about this, right? I think the way we look at this bubbles is exactly right. The know your data. How do you discover that data? So we really has invested a lot to go find that data first. Second thing is about classifying, right? So classifying that data. This is where we continue to build these ML capabilities to help you automatically classify that information. Or look, I'm working on a very highly confidential document, and I want to be able to protect that information. So this is where I can manually go apply that label, right? I mean, look, the days, John, of when we've been doing labeling for what? hundreds of years, right? So so it's nothing has changed, but I think that's the human way of doing this. But we also are trying to now give that recommendations, just like suggestions, etc. But we also wanted to make sure that we did not take that extreme change management from going from this manual capability all the way to that machine learning capability. So and one of the things we heard from customers, hey, make it native. We've talked about so many products, right? Vivek is one of those advocates who beats me up all the time about, hey, make everything, even records management, just native in the ribbon. So that's what we've done with information protection, is really about making the in the ribbon to be able to classify. Now, where customers still need help, and this is where we as Microsoft, it's hard for us to templatize this too at a granular level, is your taxonomy, right? Your industry, your vertical, how you do business. This is where I think we always, we can always give playbooks to our customers and partners, but this is where I think if you can get a little bit of a leg up of kind of having a simplified taxonomy, that really helps. Versus having something complex, it gets, because in my label, I have 5 labels I can pick from in my inside Microsoft very quickly to kind of classify that information, right? So you can see that everything that we do is very role-based. Who you are, what access you have, so you can see the information. That's the whole piece around protection that we're working on. So at the same time, we also want to make sure while we protect that information, we also want to be able to govern it. So I'll talk a little bit about the governance and the records management piece. Of course, everyone wants this thing, and we continue to have this interesting debate about, do we create one label to rule them all? Right, which is have one label that can have both, or can we have 2 separate labels? So that debate continues, but there are some investments, I'll give a hint, that we are going to be making in that area to make things a little bit easier for our customers this year. And of course, then giving the dashboards not only to the administrators, but also to be able to give the users to be able to see what's happening in that area. And I'll talk a little bit about that admin experience or the information worker, what's happening in a minute when I talk about the Priva solution. One of the things we realize with information protection is the fact that you want to be able to protect that important information. That's why the DLP piece is so critical. But guess what? When you want to set up DLP, it takes a much more generic way of protecting your data. And this is what customers said, hey, Microsoft, you have all the tools and the foundational pieces and the platform. What do you think about actually giving us a second layer of data privacy and really kind of helping us classify that data to say what is sensitive information, what are impact to the regulation? So that's kind of how, and this product of data privacy was born during the pandemic. I mean, the entire engineering team, actually, we built the product remotely because no one could go into the office. So this was one of the fastest growing products that we released. In November, we have already tons of customers who have already purchased the solution, and we have thousands are already kind of like deploying the solution. So it's super exciting to kind of talk a little bit about that in a second with you. So if you can go to the next slide. And this is just to kind of like, I just wanted to frame everyone, whoever joined late, to say I talked about information protection. Now I'll spend a little bit of time on the Microsoft Priva, which is our new privacy solution, and then we'll talk about InfoGov. So if you can build this out for me, Vivek, thank you. So I think, framing the problem, right? We've heard from customers, I don't even know where my data lives. Let's take the example of John Mancini, works at Microsoft. John Mancini in Virginia says, hey, I want to buy a house in Florida. And then he decides to use his Microsoft account to do the whole mortgage process. So now all of a sudden his social number, tax ID, everything is sitting in the OneDrive, right? So, but like now that is the sensitive information that not only puts John at risk, but also puts the company at risk, right? So that's the kind of thing that we're trying to find out with the sensitive information that is sitting in some of your personal areas. So second is from regulations. I was working with one of the big pharmaceutical organizations, and they said, look, as part of some of the clinical trials that we're working, I want to make sure my data from Asia, if it's coming to the US, it cannot cross through Europe. I need to make sure there are cross-border policies that are set so that data does not travel. How do I take sensitive information and then make sure that I get rid of it in time? How can I actually do a DSR request, but can you help me automate it? I know that we had the low-tech e-discovery tool for a while, but what we did was we created a bunch of wizards to really help through that. So that's kind of like what we heard from our customers, pressured us to say, you guys have the tech, help us build a workflow on top of that. So if you go to the next slide, this kind of like sets the stage for kind of like what we built here, right? So identifying that critical data. So very quickly, when you turn on the solution, it'll go and crawl and find that information. Again, we are all about, Microsoft is about trust. So we don't automatically return the solution for you. You will consent, and whether it's your tenant admin or the privacy office, say, okay, you know what, we want to see what's going on because I rather see what's going on in my environment. So when you turn it on, we will then identify the risk, and it will give you a dashboard. And I'm sure you can talk to any of the folks here on the call who can actually, give you a detailed demo of how this works. After that, we want to make sure that there are areas that we can also create policies and be able to put that enforcement in place. One thing that we did, and we heard from customers over and over again, hey, I want to give John Mancini the power versus it coming back to the privacy officer suddenly having, oh my God, I found 1,000 risks. And then that person puts his head in the sand because now they have to go solve all that. How can we empower and make that business user also responsible, accountable? They also can remediate. So that's what we did with this solution, where we give you a digest, and that information worker now can go and actually delete that and get rid of that information. So really made it easy to really have your privacy activity happen and automated that process. That's the uniqueness that we bring to the table with this privacy solution, because we have the signals and we're able to give it to you natively inside your local workloads. So this is kind of like to kind of, I wish next time I'll ask Vivek and crew to give me 10 minutes to, I love to demo things, right? So since I can't demo it, if you go to the next slide, just to kind of ground what I mean by this privacy solution, it really talks about these things, right? We opt in insights and policies. So after you hit yes, we give you that dashboard visually showing you what it is. Second, everything, the data, because we know that customers told us when we were engineering and designing this, especially, look, I don't want even John's information, someone in the SOC or someone in the security office or in the compliance office seeing his sensitive information. So how do you pseudo-anonymize that data so that we can make sure that there are right roles and protections set up? So role access was critical in how we did this and how we anonymized the data, and making sure that we still also build some simple workflow. So that was really the fundamentals. And we are just getting started with a V1 solution, but super excited. So if you'll see a lot more on this in the next couple of weeks, that you'll start seeing a lot more coming from our internal teams, and executives are super excited about this new privacy solution. And finally, one thing that, I'll tell you, we made sure that this privacy solution was like, everyone's like, oh, everything is E5, everything is E5. No, actually this one, if you're an E1 customer, if you're an E3 customer, if you're an E5 customer, there are options that we've provided to our customers so they can be available very quickly. Just wanted to kind of throw that out there. So how am I doing with time? Do I have 2 more minutes to just talk about one of my favorite topics, data governance?
90 seconds.
90 seconds. Okay, all right. Let's go, Vivek. Like I said, okay, John, you and I have talked about this. You talked about this in your opening remarks. So everyone knows this. the reality, it's kind of interesting that the data just continues to grow, right? Including my personal data, right? Every time I buy a new device, I have more data. So what did we do? So if you go to the next slide, with InfoGov and records management, I think, look, we've heard loud and clear from our customers about, look, you cannot be just about Microsoft. So one of the things that we did there is really focused on kind of bringing this other data. So we have over 50 plus connectors that we are bringing the data in to the solution to govern that data. And so how to govern, one of the key things that I was super excited about is, like, I've been beating up all the engineering folks about, give me multi-stage disposition. Yes, we got that. So that's now available in GA. The second one that I really loved about, if you go to the next slide, this is my favorite capability. I usually don't call out people who's in the audience, but there's one person I'm going to call out, which is Susan Cisco is on the call. So, oh my God, like, this is something that people have been asking around adaptive policies, right? Can we put a policy that's dynamic, that kind of, as people leave in and out, the policy kind of like organically changes, no policy limits, so you can take a bunch of Teams sites, SharePoint sites, Exchange, and then come up with your own connotation, and then you can run that policy. So we really did a lot of work. The bunch of engineers worked on this adaptive policy scope. So just want to give you just a little bit of a hint for you guys to take a look at some of the work you've done. We just released this about 3 months ago. Please take a look at some of the work you've done in records management. So significant investment area. With that, John, thank you so much for having me and Vivek and Brian on this call. And like I said, Infotection is a really important partner for us, like many partners in our environment, and really appreciate all the work you guys are doing in our ecosystem to get people excited about our solution. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nishan. It's really a pleasure to bring Vivek into the conversation now. And, particularly Vivek, I think where Nishan concluded with adaptive policy scopes, one of the things I've been most impressed with Infotection is this idea that it's not just about how you automate policies, it's also about how automation capabilities affect those very policies to begin with. And that's been a real key issue, I think, for Infotection moving forward. So let me turn it over to you, and I will try to I'll try to keep my time. When I go, how about this? I'll go like this when you ought to wrap up.
I think it's going to be a competition who speaks for longer. Nishan or I.
It's a great topic and really knowledgeable people. So go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you, Nishan. I actually, just picking up on the adaptive policies, I made some notes. I mean, in short, I can say you've made many more fans than you had before with the adaptive scopes. So well done. Thank you very much for adaptive scopes. So I just want to spend a few seconds on a little bit on the compliance topic. Quite often compliance is sort of looked at very much from a privacy point of view. But there are different disciplines which come together to meet the compliance needs of an organization, mostly driven by a certain compliance criteria. And these compliance criteria are not just laws and regulations or industry standards or regulatory compliance. It's a lot driven by a company as well. What are the company's requirements? What are the business requirements? How does a company want to perform and see itself in the market? We have heard from a lot of our customers that compliance is above and beyond the laws and regulations. It's about image. It's about brand. It's about building a brand. It's about protecting a brand. It's about creating value out of information. How can compliance help organizations create value and not just seen as something which is going to restrict people from doing what they are supposed to do? So that's where we operate in between that space of protecting the information, but also empowering people to create value out of information. One of the key takeaways for me, actually, I'm just going to read through the notes that I made while Nishan was talking. And one of the key takeaways from Nishan's talk is really what we're seeing in Microsoft's investment space is the effort and investment which is going on in all the consolidation, all the different solutions which Microsoft has in security compliance space. And even before that, a few years ago, SharePoint was a completely different system from Exchange Online, right? Now it's one single platform. They all understand each other. And I think that's where, from a partnership point of view, Microsoft and Infotection find a close alignment as design partners. Our focus is for our customers is to meet the compliance, information management requirements through a collection of technologies, frameworks, practices, and behaviors, right? So it's not just about implementing a technology and switching on pieces of functionality which you have in your license, but it is also how you implement it and how you embed it within your organization, which should create a positive impact to the people who are eventually going to use this functionality. And that reflects in what Nishan also said about growth. As his team has grown significantly, the market itself has grown quite significantly. And I think kind of it's comparable to the need in the market through this rapid transition to cloud, which is driving the need for more compliance, more integration between technologies. And so that's kind of shifting the needle a lot for many organizations to move away from the classic traditional business cases for change, which are made for IT projects or IT implementation projects, to actually embed compliance components into it. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So the key question, or some of the key questions that we see quite often are actually listed over here. How can I show my business is compliant with regulatory standards? What is it that I need to do in this space of Microsoft 365, where increasingly work is happening? A lot of the time people spend is working with documents, emails, and now with Teams, chats, etc. Effectively, we are collaborating with each other a lot more. And by doing that, we're creating a lot more information, much more than we were creating before. And the compliance capabilities which are built into the Microsoft stack, they are actually bringing those capabilities together so that you can really practically apply those policies which you all have. You have information management standards, you have guidelines, you have retention schedules. Previously, they were pretty much implemented in the form of standards and documents, but not necessarily maybe implemented in specialized systems. Like many customers have record management systems where all the record management rules, all the compliance rules are implemented, and people have to take that information from where they're working, the system of the origin of that information, into these systems. But actually, leaving all of that information in the source systems also creates compliance risks, audit findings for organizations. So this is a great opportunity. As you are going through the cloud adoption, if you're already on the cloud, Microsoft Cloud specifically, there's a great opportunity to leverage some of these tools and capabilities which are baked in to the product, such as records management, retention management capabilities, and also other capabilities such as the new privacy compliance solution, which Nishan talked about. And as Nishan said, our mission is really to maximize your investment in Microsoft licensing through this use of enabling these capabilities, providing those taxonomies to you, and actually baking as much as possible these capabilities into the native product so that those taxonomies are also available to you. So for example, now in the compliance suite, you have a number of templates, predefined templates already available that you can readily use to do a current maturity assessment or current state assessment of your compliance posture within your organization. We have capabilities now in Compliance Suite which automatically go and detect the information and provide you signals across your Microsoft 365 platform so that you can take actions against it. So it's a very interesting space. But one of the top questions we get is, where do I begin? This is all great, but what is it that I need to do in order to get started? And so that's where in protection and Microsoft have developed a number of these templates and frameworks that you can use and apply, and what we call as a minimum viable product, that you can use that to get started and not wait for the technology to be implemented. And I'm going to come on to the next slide just very quickly to talk about it. So compliance, when it is done retrospectively, is always complex and expensive. We've seen so many scenarios where customers have rolled out teams. In some cases, there are more teams than people in the company. And now there is effort going on to apply governance in order to address compliance risks, which are now seen because of the certain ways information is used. So again, it's a great use case. It's a great business case to support your case for embedding compliance capabilities as soon as possible as part of your implementations, rather than waiting for the IT implementation to complete, because you can do it much more sooner. You can do a lot more faster, and actually in the same time as you would activate certain functionalities.
Vivek, I'm going to gate crash your session for 1 second. One thing that I know you guys have done a lot about this to get started is I know that you'll talk about this, which is about the easy trials that we have set up. And because I know that you guys have, that really helps these customers because lots of folks said to us, oh my, where do I get started? How do I get started? So I think love for you to also elaborate a little bit to these folks here about what you have done on that space.
Yeah, so thanks. So we'll cover that. I'll cover that a little bit, and when I hand over to Brian, he will definitely talk about that. What you can do very quickly to realize the benefit and adopt some of those capabilities into your organization. So just a few seconds on this slide. From a business case point of view, there are not just strategic benefits with implementing a compliance into your building that into your business case for cloud implementations. There are operational benefits as well. People who are engaged operationally, operations team, with this done right, they can focus really on the real tasks rather than multiple requests for subject access requests or finding the information where the risks are. When compliance is baked into your platform, your solution, it can do the job for you. So it can actually not just solve your problems as part of the implementation, but operationally can also reduce cost and reduce effort and stress on your operation team, which we see happening quite often with the increased amount of volume within Microsoft 365. There is a consistency from an operations point of view, and there's a repeatability with integrating compliance and baking that into everything that you do, whether it is Yammer, whether it is your discussions happening in SharePoint, Teams, emails, etc. Tactically, this also makes sense to do, because by investing in compliance project to manage, protect, and retain important information, you can achieve, what we've seen from projects is that you can see, significant reduction in your content. We've seen organizations who are coming to the top end of their storage capacity within Microsoft 365. And this is only within 4 or 5 years of adopting Microsoft 365. So that is the speed at which information is being created. And if you are not managing it by applying lifecycle management policies, things which Nishan talked about, protecting that information, identifying that information, deleting that information without relying on the users to do it, and do it in a way that meets your regulatory compliance requirements, but also meets the business needs, you can achieve up to 90% of reduction, 10x speed increase in your review process. So it's not just about the business, but organizations who have an active litigation team or active litigation processes, it can significantly cut down the cost of the e-discovery and litigation processes and really compress the response time that you have right now within your organization. I'm going to keep it short in the interest of time. I have this slide and one more, but really is from here is to focus on small steps. Yes, there is a lot to do and there's a lot can be done in the platform, but taking small steps, start with the strategy. Once you have the business case and you're convinced that compliance, and things like, this is in this current day and time, it's an absolute no-brainer to not think about baking in compliance into your cloud adoption. So the first step should really be build a strategy on how you would integrate this. Have this as part of your architecture and design, and then run some trials. You don't always have to implement everything in production right away. You can achieve a lot and you can get your stakeholders on board by doing specific trials, proof of concepts, etc. And actually, even before that, I'm just going to come on to the next slide. You could actually look at the Cloud Accelerator workshop, which helps you map your privacy data across the organization, across geographies, etc. And that's a great way to actually get started and actually strengthen your business case about whether you should invest in compliance or not. These are workshops which run over a few days, leveraging your tenant. Quite often we see concerns from customers. Are you going to take our data outside of our platform? No, because the tools are already available. We will come in and we will work with your administrators to run some of these templates, run some of these controls using the licensing that you have, using the capabilities that you have, and you will get to see the full landscape, the full data map of your information in context of compliance. So on that note, I promise I'll finish quickly. So I'm going to hand over to Brian to talk a little bit more about strategy.
All right, next slide. So before we go off this slide, I just want to point out the guy second from the right on your screen. A number of us at InfoTection have beards. None of us are anywhere near that kind of a little bit of effort to get to that kind of beard. All right, next slide.
Aspire to, something to aspire to, Brian.
Well, or maybe, possibly. I've got too much gray in mine, so we can't go there. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the first thing I wanted to point out, the very first time that I was involved with information governance in M365, back then it was called Advanced Data Governance, something or other. I forget exactly
ADG.
what.
Yeah, you got it. ADG.
Yeah, yep. ADG, yes. And what I remember about it was the IT department at the company where I had been doing some work was coming through implementing all kinds of M365 in the cloud stuff at the time. And they came to the records manager and information governance section and said, you know what, we honestly, really, truly believe that information governance is extremely important. Now that we're done implementing everything, we want to know what your requirements are, and you've got a week to tell us. And it was like, completely backwards of the way it should have been. Echoing Vivek's comment about retrospective governance is harder than starting from scratch with a good strategy. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategy today. Not a whole lot of slides. It might not take the whole time, but we'll have probably some time at the end for questions. The first thing I want to talk about is something that you've heard a couple times in this whole process about compliance by design. The idea with compliance by design is really that the idea that you don't want to do it retrospectively. You want all the pieces in place so that when you deploy a site, when somebody creates a document, when information is shared, when information goes through its classification processes, whatever that happens to be, that you've thought ahead of time, how is that going to be compliant when the time comes? And then, therefore, all their activities are controlled and designed and automated in a way that makes it the easiest thing to do is the right thing to do, rather than randomly setting up a bunch of sites somewhere where users can do whatever they want. There is no right way to do anything because there's a lot of ways to do things. What you really want to do is build in that compliance by design to guide people into the right stages. So the key stages of a process are basically an adoption strategy, the solution design, and the proof of concepts. The adoption strategy says, let's look at and we'll talk about this in just a second, your business goals and how does that relate to the way the information is created. It's also looking at your existing policies, your existing information standards and all the bits and pieces that are currently there, the business processes that might be there, and saying not just what are they, but how can we optimize them? Where do we see gaps in the way that we're able to comply? And therefore, if we can work that into the design, we're not just automating the mess that we currently have. We're trying to build a new structure, a new way to go forward. Building a solution design is, like as Vivek said, is the kind of thing that we do very frequently with a lot of accelerators and pre-designed templates and reusable bits and pieces, because people, even though they might have different metadata, they go through the same process to build that metadata. So trying to get some standard structures around your retention, your security, your metadata, your processes, your operations, all of that bit into the solution design. And then start off, once you've got all that defined and you know where you're going, then building a proof of concept and starting small. Once again, as we've been talking about, don't try and boil the ocean. Don't do everything at once. Let's start off with something basic and simple so that the IT department feels comfortable with what's happening and how it's working and what needs to be designed. And you get a vision for how that can be deployed across the enterprise in an effective way, consistent way. And then when you're deploying, remember that you're going to be deploying over and over and over again. There's rarely ever a single go live date with a system. It's this department, this project, this site, this template, this whatever, over and over and over again, and plan for that from an ongoing perspective. And then from that point, you can then govern and improve as you need to go forward. Next slide, please. So high level steps that you want to go through: develop a vision. We'll talk about that in a second. From that, build your success factors. What is it that you need to achieve in order to achieve that vision? So the vision is a statement. I used to do some just purely strategic planning consulting in the past, and I hated to see somebody come up with a vision that became a PowerPoint stuck on a wall that never did anything, never became anything. But so what you want to do, go back one, there you go, is build your success factors into this is what we need to achieve in order to achieve that vision. The vision might be something about greater compliance, greater collaboration, all of those things combined. Whatever your goals are in there, decide what your success factors are, and from that you can organize your requirements. We then build a blueprint, which is basically all of those bits and pieces together in a document that is your foundation for how you're going to roll out the sites. It's the stuff that is going to be in every location and the stuff that maybe needs to be in some locations, and the pieces where once you start getting into a specific department or activity or function, you can then tie that back to the blueprint and revise and keep things up to date. Planning the deployment, we talked about that. It's a repetitive process that goes on, and make sure that's tied into the business case. The business case is really important, more than anything, for buy-in from your stakeholders, the people who are there offering their criteria and their requirements to your success. So next slide. This is just, it's a real simple slide. The basic concept is we start with the business strategy, the business goals at the top. Let's look at your organization, not from a technology perspective, not from any other perspective, other than your organization is trying to do things in life and accomplish things. You've got a dream on the left hand in that little box about where you want your governance system to be, but let's start with right next to it something that says, you know, we're growing at a certain rate, we're having a lot of attrition, we're trying to build in these new departments and functions, we're adopting these new products over the next 5 years in our product line. Whatever your strategic goals are, that should give you some idea of where you want to go from things. You can build from that your critical success factors and then your vision. And the vision, the overall picture on this and the way this maps is to say your business strategy guides your vision, which then determines what responsibilities and activities need to happen to achieve that vision, which then tells you what data you need and what places to achieve those activities. And that should lead to what requirements you have from a business activity. That seems logical and practical, and I know that I've said that just sort of straightforward, but the best way to think about it is in reverse and see how it doesn't work. If you choose all your applications, your classifications, your standards, without thinking about all of those other things, that will determine what activities you can actually do as an organization. And those activities will determine what functions you can provide, which will determine what your goals will be. So it's all backwards if you start from the bottom moving up. You want to go from the top down. And that's the general principle on how we want to build strategic alignment. Next slide, please. This is probably the most important thing about the whole discussion. You'll see this in a lot of different ways. It's part of the IGRM model in that round circle that you may have seen as part of the EDRM model. I won't get into that. But basically what it's saying is that you've got a number of constituencies within your organization that are trying to determine how information is managed and controlled and trying to meet the business needs of the organization. You can see those constituencies across the top. What you really want more than anything else is have all of them represented in a steering committee or in your processes so that you're reflecting everybody's needs. Because one of the things that you'll find is if you spend a lot of time on the privacy regulations on how you classify privacy, you might find some conflict with how information needs to be kept from a litigation perspective. You might be getting rid of stuff according to the ICO, but that needs to be kept from a litigation, but also might be part of a records retention schedule and has its certain classifications in there as well. So determining how long we keep things, determining how well they're preserved, how much security is on top of them, how they get classified, how you apply labels, all of that stuff will be determined by a number of different constituents that may conflict in the way they see things. And so you want to resolve those so you don't get too far down the road and realize that you've built something that is causing more problems than you thought because you didn't take the holistic picture on the whole thing. So each of these people have their criteria that they want to provide, but they also have the benefits that they receive from it. So that's the important thing to remember to communicate to them is, please be with us on this journey. We know that you're going to benefit from this as well as everybody else, and we want you to be there with us. So that's the idea of the multiple stakeholders in this process. Next slide, and I'm almost done. So basically what we're going to do is, first of all, design. Put in your privacy by design. Design your critical components for usability, compliance controls on the way humans act, so it's operational as well, and how you're going to deploy. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to build an entire information architecture ahead of time. It just means we need to get the stuff that needs to be replicated when we start the deployment process in a way that is already there and already consistent. And then we start building your minimal viable product. Once again, we're not trying to build everything all at once. We want to build in the appropriate functionality, the appropriate information architectures, and the appropriate security, a number of other things, but those are the big primary ones. And once again, we're building something that users can see. It can be in a test tenant if it needs to be. Users can see it, records managers can see it, security can see it, and sort of get a sense for what it is we're trying to do and how is that going to work going forward. And that's your beginning structure from which you start building an agile process and adding in departments, groups, functions, all based on your strategic imperatives about what's most important and your priorities, but also any other environmental constraints that might be out there. And so just remember the tips, the takeaways from this are, don't try and design everything before you start. There's a typo there. I missed that one. Apologies. Don't try and design everything before you start. Plan it. Do the necessary stuff at the beginning and build from there. There's no single start date for this. You're going to be building these things forever. The minute you design everything, actually, this is an important part of this. If you're planning resources to help design and implement, don't expect that they're going to disappear at the end of the last go live. You're still, the very next day, somebody's going to come back and say, we need a new site, we got a new department, we're splitting this, we're doing this, and you need those resources to continue at some point to operationalize the deployment of these systems over time. Include the requirements from all your stakeholders, and remember, you're not building software. Microsoft has already built it. What you're doing is designing an environment into which this software can work effectively. And then last slide for me, one more. All right, we wanted to leave this little takeaway with you, something to think about if you want to, if this is interesting to you and you want to learn more about it. We do a number of clients that begin with a 4-week proof of concept, design 1 or 2 work use cases within the environment, build that up, make that look like what you would expect to see, what it looks like. You can then trial it, get your IT department to feel comfortable with it, get your records managers to feel comfortable with it. And from that, we can build an adoption plan and knowledge to your IT and compliance teams for their enterprise implementation. It's a great way to get started. If that's interesting to you, please reach out to John. He'll make sure he connects us with whoever you need to connect to. And that's all I have to tell you.
Great. Well, thank you. We have a few minutes for questions, so thank you guys for being concise. Really appreciate all 3 of you. Couple questions. First, just one comment. If you guys haven't been to the Infotection blog, Atla and Vivek and Brian are prolific writers. The amount of information there is amazing. And if you haven't been to that blog, make sure you check it out because there's a lot of great stuff there. So a lot of these questions are for Nishan that popped up, and but everybody else feel free to chime in as well. So Nishan, first of all, question about managing information outside of M365. You touched on that a bit, but maybe you could just expand on that a bit.
Yeah, great. Couple of things. One is when we start looking at, and I'll start with what you said earlier about unstructured versus structured. So take a look at Azure Purview, which is kind of, it's a good hint for you to take a look at how we are going to look at structured, unstructured, how these worlds are going to start coming together, right? So that was, we made some great announcements late last year about Azure Purview, and you can see how that will get kind of combined in as the journey path. Everyone knows how Microsoft starts and how we go. So that's point number one. Number two is also building that ecosystem, I think, with these data connectors. And I'm sure, John, if people want more information, they can email you. I'm happy to send you a resources slide about how we are thinking about data connectors and connecting to other systems. Again, to exactly what Vivek said earlier about, hey, it's not about trying to move things around. The days of moving things around are gone. It's about how do we still manage that information where it is. That's why we have this strategy laid out.
So another question here. Somebody asked when you were talking about Priva, is that an E5 thing, an E3 thing? What is it?
Good question. So I think, as I mentioned, Priva is a solution that we are going to, it's an add-on that we are going to make available for E1 customers, E3 customers, and E5 customers. I'll also, if the questions go another way, I do want to also extend an invite to everyone on this call, whoever wants to have a roadmap session that's under NDA to talk about any specific product, what's our 6 months, 12-month, 18-month plan. Please reach out to John, and then John, you can coordinate with me to have those sessions. So there are some things obviously I can't disclose in a public forum, but if there are specific things of a product features, capabilities, where that investment is going, especially around that ecosystem, if there are specific things people have, feel free to reach out to John, and then I can help coordinate those meetings with my team members.
Right, thank you. And again, that's john.m@infotection.com. How about, there's a question here about when you were talking about MIP. What's next? What's next in the wheelhouse there?
Yeah, MIP, I knew you were going to ask me that question. So think about going back to that slide I showed you about information protection, insider risk, e-discovery, compliance manager, Priva. What we are going to start doing is really start looking at cross-solution scenarios. When you, like, if there's an insider risk, if it's a label, how do we get those pieces together? So you're going to see a lot more integration point scenarios that are going to come up. So MEP is kind of like our flagship solution that kind of sits with multiple things. So there's a lot of investments that are happening in that area. Again, due to things we are building right now, there'll be announcements that we'll make throughout the summer and then close to winter time. But if anyone wants specific details, but at least I want to give you that high level cross product scenarios are going to be a hot topic to watch for.
And I'd like to ask all three of you to comment on this question, which expanded upon this on the slide talking about minimally viable systems and what you do now and what you do later, and how do you get started? And just if you have a piece of advice for people that you'd like to leave with them, really just maybe close on that. So let's start with you, Vivek, and then we'll go Brian, and then we'll wrap up with Nishan.
I would definitely say that, there is a lot of information available already. So, things that you can do yourself. Microsoft has done a tremendous job in publishing the information, making it publicly available. There are demo environments already available for you to try things out yourself. But having some of these capabilities baked into the system, I just talked about, the POCs, for example, now 4 weeks. Compliance assessments, a couple of days, and they are real because the information is already there and in your tenant, and these capabilities, and all we do is actually help you better interpret that information to bring it out in a way that is helpful to you and making those decisions. I think one of the things that I will just also say is that we're working and this design partnership is really great with Microsoft because it is helping us to influence, that product roadmap, working with our customers to actually go together with you. And it's through your investment, through your participation, is only we can bake more and more into the product.
Great. Brian. And you were on mute.
I never know when I'm on mute. There you go. Thank you for that. Yes, the thing that occurs to me is, strangely, this has happened about 5 or 6 times very recently, where we've had conversations with companies about 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago, gathering information, gathering thoughts, and eventually, when the client gets to the point where they've got enough input and they know where to go forward, then they start reaching out to find help and advice on moving forward. So if you're in that boat and you're wondering where to go next, I think the one very good first step is reach out to us and just have a conversation. We'd be glad to get together with you for an hour or 2 hours, run a workshop, run some sort of discussion, whatever it is, to help guide you on basically what we just talked about during the session, and maybe that'll help.
And Nishan, you get the last word.
John, I've been talking to you about this for years. It hasn't changed. Take a crawl, walk, run approach to this. And my thanks to the InfoTechSean team, because I think it's partners like you who help us, to Vivek's point about that design partnership, giving us the tough feedback, learning from each other, but more importantly, having partners like you who are trusted, who we share information so that the entire community can benefit. That's the value here, right? This journey is not just about us versus them. It's not about Microsoft versus a partner versus the customer. We all need to do this together. So that's kind of the mindset we are at in this journey. So super excited to be here. And again, take that crawl, walk, run approach. Take one step at a time. I think these guys have done a really good job in simplifying that, because everything is complex, but take that simple step one.
And my last piece of advice is check out that blog. It's really, that you can see in the chat, all sorts of attaboys about what goes on there. And you three do a terrific job on the InfoTechSean blog of really sharing information very generously. And I think people appreciate that. So thank you guys very much. It was really terrific. We really appreciate the audience being here. And on behalf of InfoTechSean, Nishan and Brian and Vivek, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.